Hey guys, Shay here. Don't get excited, this isn't new content, sorry. It's just the last bit of this week's antibiotics episode in a digestible chunk that's easier to share. I really want to get the word out about how dangerous fluoroquinolone antibiotics really are. But not everyone wants to sit through a 45-minute podcast episode to get to that information. So if you've already listened to this week's episode about the history of antibiotics, then you've already heard this. But I really hope that you will share it with everyone, because anyone who doesn't know this is at risk of it happening to them. Knowledge really is power. Let's fix that. Please put the pressure on your doctor to actually run some tests, do a culture, something, do their actual job before just handing out super powerful blanket antibiotics without any proof or evidence that you even have a bacterial infection. And please, never, ever, unless you are definitely going to die without them and there is no other option, never take fluoroquinolone antibiotics. And now we've reached the point in today's episode where I tell you my personal horror story in the hopes that it might spare you the agony of what my husband lives with every day. And before I get into this, you should know I'm not like one of those anti-modern medicine, anti-doctor people at all. I got epidurals both times I gave birth. Would do it again. 10 out of 10. You natural birth mamas are nuts. I mean, I salute you, but you are nuts. I got the COVID vaccine and the booster. My kids are fully vaccinated. We take safe antibiotics when we actually need antibiotics. And I'm pretty sure antibiotics have potentially saved my life on at least 2 occasions that I can think of right now. Okay, so factor that in. Around 3 years ago, a couple months after having my second child, so we had a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, which means this was the worst possible time imaginable for this to happen, my husband started having groin pain. Never did figure out what caused that groin pain, but it was bothersome enough for him to go to urgent care. The doctor, who I would love to name but won't, saw him for approximately 5 minutes. She ran no tests, asked few questions, and he left with a prescription for ciprofloxacin, which is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic, and prednisone, which is a steroid usually used to help with inflammation. He's like, okay, doctor told me to take these. She told me this was okay. Guess I'll take them. Didn't know all that much about them. Didn't think to Google it. The doctor prescribed them. The pharmacist gave them to him. They must be fine. Well, they weren't fine at all. And well, here, I'll let him tell you the story. This audio is coming from a video he recorded a couple years ago. I asked him if he wanted to come talk about it on the show, but he declined, which is what I expected. He really can't talk about it or think about it, really, without it just really wrecking him mentally. So this audio is a little old, but it's all still the same, unfortunately.
Hey everybody, I'm going to try to keep a long story short here. In March of 2021, last year, I was prescribed an antibiotic called ciprofloxacin, which is part of a family of antibiotics called fluoroquinolone antibiotics. I also was prescribed it with a steroid called prednisone, and we ended up finding out these 2 drugs are contraindicated. You're not supposed to take them together, and I did ask about that and was told it was fine. Over the course of the past year, I've been developing really bad tendon problems. Feels like my tendons are going to rip, and it took the first 6 months were slow, and I wasn't sure what was going on. I thought I was out of shape, and I was still able to be semi-active, and then things really deteriorated fast around the 6-month mark, and I was seeing a lot of doctors trying to figure out, is it Lyme? We're trying to figure everything out, and then we find the world of Cipro toxicity and fluoroquinolone toxicity, and it becomes very clear this is what's going on. I don't want to make anybody sad or bum anybody out, but I do feel like you guys need to understand like how disabled I am. I used to be a drummer, and I can't play drums anymore. I can't play guitar. I can't even really help my wife work online for very long before my fingers just kind of can't do it anymore. I can't really walk very well. It's super agonizing to walk, to hold my baby. I can't hold him for very long. I just feel like I should make clear kind of how disabling this is and what's happening. Your body's like cannibalizing its own muscles and tendons, basically. I was told by a doctor that this was going to be safe. I trusted them. I remember asking, are these two drugs safe to take together? Yes, you're young. This should be fine. And I didn't feel any symptoms as I was taking them. It wasn't until like a week later.
So Joey says these two drugs are contraindicated, which means you aren't supposed to take them together. There is an FDA black box warning on fluoroquinolone antibiotics like Cipro or Levaquin. There's a bunch, though. There's like 60 generic versions of these. So anytime you're prescribed antibiotics, just make sure that they aren't fluoroquinolones. Here's a rundown of all the warnings, and this is coming directly from the FDA website. Quote, the FDA first added a boxed warning to fluoroquinolones in July 2008 for the increased risk of tendinitis and tendon rupture. In February 2011, the risk of worsening symptoms for those with myasthenia gravis were added to the boxed warning. In August 2013, the agency required updates to the labeling to describe the potential for irreversible peripheral neuropathy, serious nerve damage. In 2016, the FDA enhanced warnings about the association of fluoroquinolones with disabling and potentially permanent side effects involving tendons, muscles, joints, nerves, and the central nervous system. Because of the risk of these serious side effects generally outweigh the benefits, the FDA determined that fluoroquinolones should be reserved for use in patients who have no alternative treatment options, end quote. I'm going to try not to get real mad while I'm getting through this part. Ooh, okay. They also added additional warnings in 2018 for mental health side effects, including problems with attention, disorientation, agitation, nervousness, memory impairment, and delirium. And they also added a warning for hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, leading to hypoglycemic coma. These antibiotics are incredibly strong. They kill everything, which is why they are so often prescribed. The doctor goes, well, I don't know what's wrong with you, but if it's bacteria, this'll kill it. Even though it literally says on the label, do not prescribe these antibiotics unless there is no other treatment option available. A National Library of Medicine article about fluoroquinolone antibiotics states, quote, tendon rupture, nerve damage, and fluoroquinolone-associated disability syndrome have been reported for most fluoroquinolones when they are used for a long-term period, and these side effects are proposed to be potentially permanent, end quote. And I just want to point out that Joey did not take them for a long-term period. He took them for like 2 weeks, and he was 32 years old and in good health. It goes on to say, quote, the safety profiles of quinolones is being updated constantly, since some life-threatening adverse effects, such as aortic rupture and dissection caused by exposure to fluoroquinolones, have recently attracted additional warnings by the FDA in 2018. It is advised that fluoroquinolones are not to be used for patients with an aortic aneurysm or the elderly, and only as a last-line defense, end quote. So we have reserved for patients with no alternative treatment options and only as a last line defense. So you tell me why Joey was handed Cipro with 0 tests run, few questions asked, and without a diagnosis. That is not a last line defense. That is a first line, halfway guess at a defense that didn't work anyway but has since ruined his life. And that's typical. They give these out like candy. I've personally taken Cipro on more than one occasion. In that same year, the FDA updated the warnings, 2018, Cipro was prescribed to 6.7 million Americans alone, just America. And Levaquin was prescribed 3.9 million times. And who even knows how many millions of times all the different generic brands of these were prescribed. And the response from the medical community about these debilitating side effects is weird, to say the least. They basically refuse to acknowledge that it's real, despite the FDA warnings. They'll do absolutely nothing to try to help you. you can't work, but you can't get disability benefits because you don't have a diagnosis, because no doctor will give you a diagnosis because they're in denial about fluoroquinolone toxicity. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but my mind certainly jumps there. Why the denial? Is it because they're liable and they're trying to avoid getting sued? Oh yeah, you can't sue these guys either, by the way. Everyone always asks if we're going to sue. You can't take down big pharma, guys. People have tried. You'll just spend all your money going around in circles, and once again, doctors won't even diagnose you with anything, so you have nothing concrete to prove anything anyway. It's a mess. It's a big, life-ruining mess. Because living in chronic pain every second of every day is no joke. My husband is 35 years old. He should not be hobbling around, wincing in pain like a 90-year-old. He should not have to give up everything he enjoyed doing at such a young age. He can't take care of our kids without me, which is heartbreaking. And people ask how he's doing all the time, and it's like, not good, It's been 3 years and tens of thousands of dollars, and we've seen very little change. That's the sad truth of it. And every time someone asks, it just hits him all over again. Because this isn't just a physical struggle, it's incredibly mental as well. He doesn't look sick. He doesn't look like he's in pain. I mean, sometimes he does because he's literally limping, but for the most part, he looks okay. And yet, in reality, he's suffering so much all the time. He's met a lot of people with this same condition, fluoroquinolone toxicity or Cipro poisoning, or sometimes it's just called being floxed. As he sat in a regenerative medicine office in Los Angeles 2 years ago, getting some sort of IV infusion or peptide injection or whatever, he got to chatting with a woman who was also experiencing this. She was a breast cancer survivor, and she said that this was easily 10 times worse, that she would easily take cancer again over Cipro poisoning. Hundreds of people experiencing this after taking fluoroquinolone antibiotics have committed suicide, choosing to end their lives rather than to go on suffering. So when I say that today's episode may very well save your life, I mean it. I know this has been a huge bummer. We don't like to burden people with it. But at the same time, it just feels like something no one knows, like this huge threat no one knows about. We had no idea, and if we had known, this wouldn't be happening to us. Joey can't talk about it, but I can. And if I can save just one person with this episode, then that's huge. Please share this. Please tell everyone you know. And please do not take fluoroquinolone antibiotics. There is almost always another option available. Trust me, you don't know until you know, and then there's no going back. It's not worth the risk. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I will be back on Sunday with a new full-length episode. If you aren't a History Fix listener and you just had this shared with you as a warning, my heart is singing, but also we would love for you to join us. You can find History Fix wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, other places. You can also connect with me on Instagram or TikTok at History Fix Podcast. There you'll find images that go along with each episode and can stay on top of new episodes as they drop. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix.